At 70 years old, I buried my dignity in the back seat of a Corolla parked outside the Duluth courthouse as my own daughter spat the words that shattered my heart. "You've ruined our family name." How quickly they all believed I'd stolen $87,000 from my special needs granddaughter's medical fund. How easily my reputation of 30 years crumbled to dust. They didn't know about the mysterious bank receipts hidden in my attic. They didn't see my niece clutching that unexplained envelope while wearing my dead sister's coat. When your family abandons you and strangers celebrate you, when Forbes magazine calls you the greatest comeback story in business, while your own flesh and blood won't look you in the eye, what price would you pay to protect a family secret that's eating you alive from the inside out? Follow my channel for more heartbreaking true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew. About family loyalty, redemption, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life when you've lost everything. Like and comment below to let me know where you're watching from. I was 70 years old when I buried my dignity in the back seat of a Corolla parked in front of the Duluth courthouse. The snow clung to my red coat as if trying to hide my shame from the world. My shoes were soaked through, and the silence of the street seemed to mock me. It was on that day that my daughter, looking straight into my eyes, spat out, "You've ruined our family name." Never had a phrase hurt so much, and it came from the mouth of the person I loved most. It wasn't always like this. Just 6 months ago, I was Eleanor Wilson, respected matriarch of 3 generations, owner of a small but successful fabric store that had clothed half of Duluth for 30 years. My late husband Richard and I had built everything from scratch, turning a tiny shop into a cornerstone of the community. Our name meant something in this town. People trusted the Wilson label. But trust is a fragile thing, isn't it? Like those delicate crystal figurines my mother left me. Beautiful until they shatter into pieces you can never put back together quite right. Everything fell apart because of the money from the fundraiser for my granddaughter's treatment. They said I stole it, that I diverted it to pay off my debts. Nieces, brothers-in-law, even neighbors repeated the story as if it were absolute truth. I, who cared for that special little girl as if she were the last flame of my life, found myself branded a thief. Little Abigail was born with a rare muscular condition. My beautiful 7-year-old granddaughter, with eyes that shine like her grandfather's and a smile that could melt Minnesota's harshest winter. The fundraiser had collected nearly $87,000 for an experimental treatment in Baltimore. Money that vanished like morning mist, leaving only accusations in its wake. "How could you, Mom?" My daughter Jennifer's voice cracked that afternoon in the courthouse parking lot. Her husband Todd stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes avoiding mine. "Dad would be ashamed. Everyone's talking about it. The Wilsons were honest people before you did this." The snow fell harder, collecting on my shoulders like the weight of judgment. I wanted to scream the truth at the top of my lungs, but the words froze in my throat. How could I tell her that I suspected the real culprit was my niece Cassandra, my dead sister's only daughter? The last living piece of Martha I had in this world. The week before, I'd seen something strange. Cassandra wearing her mother's old coat, something she never did, clutching an envelope she wouldn't explain. When I asked about it, she'd looked at me with my sister's eyes and changed the subject. That night, my store's account showed an unexplained transfer. By morning, the fundraiser money was gone, and all evidence pointed to me. While the snow fell, I was faced with an impossible dilemma. Expose the true culprit, my own niece, daughter of my sister who died far too young, or carry the guilt alone to protect her memory. In that moment, I didn't have the strength to fight. All I had left was silence. But silence has a price, and I paid far too dearly. "I never want to see you at Abby's school events again," Jennifer continued, her breath visible in the cold air. "The other parents are talking. They're saying things about her because of what you did." I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the bankruptcy papers inside it. Everything was gone. My store, my savings, my reputation. At 70, I was starting over with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of secrets. "Jenny, please," I whispered, reaching for her hand. "There are things you don't understand." She pulled away as if my touch might contaminate her. "Don't. Just don't, Mom. The money was for Abby, for your granddaughter. How could you? How are we supposed to get her treatment now?" Todd finally spoke up, his voice low but cutting. "We've had to take out a second mortgage on the house. Jennifer's going back to work full-time, even though Abby needs her at home. All because you couldn't manage your store properly and decided to—" He stopped himself, but the accusation hung in the frigid air between us. What they didn't know What no one knew was that I'd already sold my wedding ring to make the first payment for Abby's treatment. I'd made arrangements with the clinic in Baltimore. I'd done everything I could to make things right, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. As they walked away, leaving me alone in the snow, I noticed an older man watching from a nearby bench. He wore an expensive-looking coat and scribbled something in a small notebook. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, continuing to write. I thought nothing of it then. How could I know that this stranger would later become a pivotal figure in the story of my disgrace and redemption? I got into my old Corolla, the last possession the bankruptcy proceedings hadn't taken from me, and sat there for what felt like hours, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, blurring the world outside just as my tears blurred my vision. That night, in the empty apartment I'd moved into after losing my house, I made a decision. I wouldn't expose Cassandra. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the daughter of my beloved sister, but I also wouldn't simply disappear into shame and regret. Somehow, some way, I would find a path forward, not just for me, but for Abby. What I didn't realize then was that my journey back would reshape not just my life, but the lives of everyone who had turned their backs on me, and it would all begin with a simple needle and thread. After the bankruptcy, I moved into a tiny studio apartment near the West Duluth marketplace. It was barely 400 square feet, a far cry from the Victorian home Richard and I had lovingly restored over decades. The walls were a dingy beige, the carpet worn thin in pathways from previous tenants. But the rent was just $650 a month, and it was all I could afford now. I spent my days mending used clothes to survive. Each morning I'd set up my old Singer sewing machine by the window where the light was best. My fingers, growing more arthritic with each Minnesota winter, would push fabric through the machine for hours. With each thread I pulled, I heard my daughter's voice echoing, "You've dishonored us." The rhythm of the needle, up and down, became the heartbeat of my new, diminished life. The marketplace was where I bought my groceries now, not the organic store Jennifer had always insisted was the only place with decent produce. Here, bruised apples and day-old bread were sold at discounts I could actually afford. I'd become an expert at stretching $5 into a week's worth of meals, skills I hadn't needed since Richard and I were newlyweds in 1973. In the market, I heard the whispers. Women who once asked for my famous apple pie recipe now averted their eyes, as if the simple act of acknowledging me would make them accomplices to my alleged crime. Mrs. Peterson, who had been bringing her family's clothes to my store for alterations for 20 years, actually crossed to the other side of the aisle when she saw me examining tomatoes. "Did you hear?" I overheard one woman say to another while I pretended to inspect a cantaloupe. "Eleanor Wilson took money from her own granddaughter's medical fund. Can you imagine? And that poor little girl in a wheelchair." My hands trembled so badly I had to set the fruit down. They didn't know Abby wasn't in a wheelchair. Her condition affected her fine motor skills and balance, not her ability to walk. They didn't know anything about us, really, but rumors never concerned themselves with accuracy. It was there, between the produce section and the day-old bakery goods, that I met Sarah Goldstein, an occupational therapist from a children's clinic in Superior. She noticed me struggling with a button on my coat, my fingers stiff and uncooperative in the cold. "Here, let me," she offered, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. She deftly secured the button, then commented, "Your coat has been repaired beautifully. Are you a seamstress?" I nodded, too ashamed to mention my former store. "I do mending work now." Sarah watched as I ran my fingers along a seam, straightening it with an instinctive precision that 30 years in the business had ingrained in me. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "we use weighted blankets at the clinic for children with anxiety and sensory processing issues. They're incredibly effective but so expensive. Most insurance plans won't cover them." The idea nestled in my mind like a seed. I knew about weighted blankets. I'd actually made a small one for Abby when she was 4, filling it with dried beans because I couldn't afford the special pellets. She'd slept through the night for the first time in months, but as quickly as the spark of interest came, a detail began to torment me. Why had my niece Cassandra never looked me in the eyes since the bankruptcy? At family gatherings, the few I was still grudgingly invited to for Abby's sake, she would busy herself with her phone or suddenly need to help in the kitchen whenever I entered a room. I remembered a strange detail. On the day the fundraiser website went live, she had worn her mother's, my sister's, old camel hair coat. Martha had treasured that coat, saved for it for months back in 1985. Cassandra had always said she hated it, that it was old lady style. Yet there she was, wearing it proudly, clutching a manila envelope she never explained. When I'd asked about the envelope, she'd mumbled something about work documents and hurried away. The next morning, the fundraiser account showed an unexplained transfer. Was it coincidence? The thought gnawed at me, even as I tried to push it aside. That night in my tiny apartment, I pulled out scraps of fabric I'd been saving, remnants from my former life as a businesswoman, pieces of velvet from a holiday dress I'd made Jennifer, flannel from baby blankets for Abby, denim from Richard's old work shirts. I ran my fingers over them, each a memory, each a piece of the life I'd lost. Outside my window, snow began to fall again, illuminated by the single street lamp on the corner. In its glow, I could see my reflection. A woman diminished, shoulders hunched, hair gone completely white in just 6 months. But my hands, despite their aches, remained steady as they sorted fabric by weight and texture. For the first time since that terrible day at the courthouse, I felt something other than shame stirring within me. Something like purpose. Maybe, I whispered to myself, maybe there's still something I can make of all this. But even as I organized my scraps and planned my first weighted blanket, another thought intruded. What would happen if I ever found proof of what Cassandra had done? What would it do to Jennifer, to Abby, to the memory of my sister? Some truths, once spoken, can never be taken back, and some silences cost more than words could ever repay. I decided to start sewing weighted blankets with fabric scraps and improvised fillings. The first one I made was rough, a patchwork of memories stitched together with careful, if imperfect, hands. I couldn't afford the proper poly pellets that commercial blankets used, so I experimented with alternatives: dried beans, rice, even clean aquarium gravel I bought for $1.99 a bag at the pet store downtown. My apartment smelled of fabric sizing and the lavender sachet I'd placed among my sewing supplies. A small luxury I allowed myself, a reminder of the garden Richard and I had tended together for 30 summers. The scent transported me, if only for moments, away from my present circumstances. This was my first real choice after the disaster. Either I would let myself wither away in silence, or I would find a new purpose. The decision came to me at 3:17 a.m., when sleep eluded me as it often did. I'd been lying awake staring at the water stain on my ceiling that, in the right light, resembled the map of Lake Superior. The weight of my choice pressed on my chest heavier than any blanket could. If I started creating something new, wouldn't it be a betrayal of everything I'd lost? A tacit acceptance of my public disgrace? And yet, what was the alternative? To disappear into bitterness and shame, becoming exactly what they all thought I was? Still, each stitch I sewed felt like a betrayal to Martha's memory. My sister had died at 43, a sudden aneurysm that collapsed her in the middle of preparing Sunday dinner. Cassandra had been only 17 then, a sullen teenager suddenly motherless. I had stepped in, finished raising her alongside Jennifer. How could I now harbor suspicions that she had stolen the money and framed me? What kind of aunt, what kind of person did that make me? Yet inside me, I knew. I knew who had taken the money, and I chose silence. Every time I pushed the needle through fabric, I felt the weight of that choice. "You're not sleeping again," Mrs. Kozlowski, my upstairs neighbor, had noted the day before. She was a widowed Polish immigrant who'd lived in the building for 23 years and seemed to track my movements with eerie precision. "I hear your sewing machine at midnight, at 3 in the morning. The grief it keeps you up?" I'd nodded, not bothering to explain that it wasn't grief that kept me awake, but rage. A quiet, simmering rage that I, Eleanor Wilson, who had never so much as taken a pen from a bank, was now seen as a thief who would steal from her own granddaughter. The irony was that I had been the one to suggest the fundraiser in the first place. I had helped Jennifer set up the website, had contributed the first $5,000 from my store's savings. I had been there when Abby was diagnosed, had held my daughter while she cried, had researched treatments late into the night when everyone else had gone to bed. None of that mattered now. History is written by those with the loudest voices, and my voice had been reduced to a whisper. My granddaughter, innocent of the adult drama swirling around her, had come to visit me the previous weekend. Jennifer had reluctantly agreed to drop her off for 2 hours, waiting in the car outside rather than entering my tiny apartment. Abby had brought her favorite stuffed animal, a threadbare rabbit named Mr. Whiskers that I had sewn for her 3rd birthday. "Grandma, can you fix his ear?" "Daddy tried, but he made it worse," she'd said, holding up the rabbit with its dangling appendage. As I stitched Mr. Whiskers back together, Abby had wandered around my small space, eventually lying down on the weighted blanket prototype I'd left on my bed. "This is nice," she'd murmured, her small body relaxing visibly under the gentle pressure. "It feels like a hug all over." Her innocent observation had sent a jolt through me, a reminder that beneath all the adult complications, there was still simple truth. The blanket did feel like a hug, and who didn't need more of those? When Abby fell asleep under that blanket, her face peaceful for the first time since her diagnosis, I felt something crack open inside me. That smile made me believe that perhaps, just perhaps, I could pay my debt to the world by helping other children like her. But my newfound sense of purpose was quickly overshadowed by a chance conversation I overheard the following day. I had gone to Jennifer's house to drop off a small blanket I'd made specifically for Abby, with butterfly patterns scattered across sky blue cotton. I hadn't called ahead, a mistake, and as I approached the side door that led to the kitchen, I heard my son-in-law's voice through the partially open window. "She still has the receipt stored in the attic," Todd was saying, his voice hushed but clear in the crisp autumn air. "If anyone finds them." I couldn't make out the response from whoever was on the other end of the phone call. My heart froze in my chest. How did he know about any receipts? What receipts was he referring to? I had kept meticulous records of my business for 30 years, but all my paperwork had been seized during the bankruptcy proceedings. The only thing I had salvaged was a small lockbox containing family photographs and my marriage certificate. I'd hidden it in the rafters of my former house before the bank took possession, then retrieved it one night when no one was watching. Was that what Todd was talking about? But why would that matter to him? I retreated silently, the butterfly blanket clutched to my chest, questions swirling in my mind like the first snowflakes of winter. Something wasn't adding up, and for the first time since my disgrace, I felt the stirring of something beyond resignation, the faint but unmistakable spark of suspicion. One night, overcome with anguish, I climbed up to the attic of my studio apartment. It wasn't a proper attic, just a small storage space accessible by a pull-down ladder that groaned under my weight. The landlord had mentioned it when I moved in, almost as an afterthought. Previous tenant left some junk up there. "Feel free to use it for storage, but don't put anything too heavy, the boards aren't reinforced." I hadn't bothered to explore it until now. What did I have to store? My life had been reduced to 2 suitcases and a sewing machine. The flashlight on my old flip phone cast weak yellowish light across the dusty space. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the insulation was visible between exposed wooden beams. The December air seeped through the thin roof, making my breath visible in small, trembling clouds. Among boxes of yellowed magazines and faded clothes, I found a folder. It wasn't mine. It must have belonged to the previous tenant, but something about it called to me. The manila envelope was worn at the edges, secured with a red string wound around a circular fastener. Inside, there were bank receipts that weren't mine. Deposits made directly from the fundraiser account to an account in my niece's name. My hands shook so violently that I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the wooden boards, the beam swinging wildly across the attic before going dark. I sat there in the darkness, the papers clutched to my chest, my heart hammering so loudly, I was certain Mrs. Kozlowski could hear it through the ceiling. These were the proof I had been carrying the weight of a lie. Here in black and white, 5 transfers, each for $17,000, made within hours of the fundraiser reaching its goal. The account number matched the one on the Christmas card Cassandra had sent me last year. She'd included her Venmo and bank details, suggesting I might want to send money instead of those handmade gifts that just collect dust. The dilemma exploded inside me like a grenade. Expose the truth and destroy the image of my dead sister's daughter, or continue being seen as a criminal. I cried so hard I could barely breathe, doubled over in that cold, dusty attic. The evidence of my innocence and my niece's betrayal spread across my lap. How had these receipts ended up here? My mind raced through possibilities. Had Cassandra rented this apartment before me? No, that was impossible. Mrs. Kozlowski had mentioned the previous tenant was an elderly man who'd moved to a nursing home. Had she visited him? Left evidence here deliberately, thinking it would never be found? Or, a more chilling thought, had someone planted them here for me to find? But who would do that, and why? I gathered the papers with trembling hands and climbed back down the ladder. My knees, stiff with arthritis and the cold, buckled slightly as I reached the floor. I made my way to the kitchenette, filled the electric kettle, and waited for the water to boil, staring at the receipts spread across my small dining table. The truth was, right there in front of me. I could take these to Jennifer, to the bank, to the police. I could clear my name. I could reclaim my dignity, my reputation, my place in my family. But at what cost? Cassandra would likely face criminal charges. The daughter of my beloved sister, the only piece of Martha I had left in this world, would go to jail. The scandal would tear our family apart even further. And Abby, my sweet Abby, how would she understand that her cousin, who bought her ice cream and took her to movies, had stolen the money meant for her treatment? I placed the receipts in a battered shoebox and hid it beneath my bed, next to the box containing Richard's ashes that I hadn't yet been able to scatter. 2 secrets, side by side in the darkness. The next morning, the weight of discovery sat heavy on my shoulders as I carried my latest batch of weighted blankets to Sarah at the children's clinic. The cold bit through my threadbare coat, and the plastic bag holding the blankets cut into my fingers. But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, because what else could I do? Sarah's face lit up when she saw my creations. The third blanket was my best yet. 5 pounds of evenly distributed weight in a soft flannel cover decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars that I'd hand-painted using special fabric ink I'd found on clearance. "Eleanor, these are remarkable," she said, running her hand over the precise stitching. "The children will love them. How did you get the weight so evenly distributed? The commercial ones we buy often have this problem where all the beads shift to one side." I managed a small smile. "Channels," I explained, showing her the vertical stitching that created separate pouches. "And I double-stitched the edges. It will hold up to washing better that way." "You should be selling these," she said, her eyes alight with excitement. "Do you know how much these cost retail? The good ones run well over $200 and most families can't afford that." I shook my head. "I'm not interested in starting another business. I need to do something useful with my hands." Sarah studied me for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "Well, I have some colleagues at rural hospitals who work with special needs children. Would you mind if I showed them your work? They're always looking for resources, especially affordable ones." I should have been happy at the possibility of my blankets helping more children. Instead, I felt only guilt. Guilt for building something beautiful on top of a disgusting secret. As I walked home, snow beginning to fall in large, wet flakes that melted against my skin, I felt torn between 2 irreconcilable truths. I was innocent of the crime everyone believed I had committed, yet I was complicit in protecting the real criminal. That night I dreamed of Martha. We were young again, sitting on the dock at our parents' cabin on Lake Vermilion, our feet dangling in the cool water. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You always were the protector," Dream Martha said, not looking at me but gazing across the water. "Even when we were kids. Remember when Tommy Schultz pushed me off the swing and you gave him a bloody nose?" I nodded, feeling the weight of memory. "But Ellie," she continued, finally turning to face me, her eyes the same clear blue I remembered. "Sometimes protection becomes its own kind of prison." I woke with tears on my pillow, the first pale light of dawn filtering through my thin curtains. Martha had been gone for 23 years, but her words, or the words my subconscious had given her, echoed in my mind as I rose to face another day of silent penance for a crime I didn't commit. It was at a family lunch that everything began to crumble again. Jennifer had reluctantly invited me to celebrate Abby's 8th birthday, a small gathering at their home on Gracelon Road. The Victorian house I had helped them buy with a down payment from my store's profits now seemed to look down on me with the same judgment as its owners. I brought Abby a special weighted lap blanket, small enough to take to school, adorned with embroidered butterflies and her initials in the corner. I'd stayed up 3 nights to finish it, my fingers cramping around the needle, my eyes straining in the dim light of my apartment. The March day was unseasonably warm, the snow melting in dirty rivulets down the street gutters. Spring in Duluth is a fickle thing, one day offering the promise of renewal, the next plunging you back into winter's grip. Rather like family relationships, I suppose. Jennifer met me at the door, her smile tight but present. "Mom," she said with a nod, accepting the wrapped gift with careful hands. She looked tired, dark circles beneath her eyes, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail rather than her usual meticulous styling. Inside, Todd was setting up a folding table in the dining room, avoiding my gaze. Cassandra was already there, arranging a fruit platter near a store-bought cake decorated with unicorns. She wore a cream-colored blouse I recognized as one I'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago, before everything fell apart. "Eleanor," she said, her voice overly bright, eyes skittering past mine. "How nice of you to come." I noticed she'd dyed her hair, a rich auburn that looked startlingly like Martha's natural color. Another piece of my sister she'd appropriated, along with $85,000 of my granddaughter's treatment money. Abby, bless her heart, had no such reservations about my presence. She flew across the room, her arms outstretched, her smile genuine. "Grandma, you came!" I caught her in a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and the faint trace of the cherry cough drops she sucked constantly to combat the dry mouth caused by her medications. "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart. Happy birthday." Todd's parents arrived shortly after, along with Jennifer's college roommate and her husband, and 2 of Abby's school friends with their mothers. Each adult greeted me with the same careful politeness one might use with a potentially unstable patient. Gentle tones, minimal eye contact, quick retreat. We ate lunch, lasagna from Grandma's restaurant downtown, salad, garlic bread. The conversation flowed around me but rarely included me. I focused on Abby, on her stories about school, on the way she carefully cut her food into precise squares, a quirk she'd had since she was 3. Cassandra left her phone on the table when she went to help Jennifer bring out the cake. It lay screen up beside her half-eaten plate, innocuous until a notification lit the screen. The sharp ping cut through a lull in conversation, and one of Abby's cousins, Jennifer's nephew Michael, always too curious for his own good, glanced down and, perhaps without thinking, tapped the notification. The phone's speaker activated, filling the suddenly quiet room with a voice we all recognized as Cassandra's. "She'll never report me. She'd rather carry the guilt herself. It's almost pathetic how far she'll go to protect Martha's memory. I mean, 85 KIs and she just takes the fall. Who does that?" A male voice responded, indistinct but clearly questioning. Cassandra's recorded voice continued, No one suspects anything. They all think dear old Aunt Eleanor embezzled the money to save her failing business. It's perfect, really. She was already having financial troubles. Who's going to question it? And she's too noble to point fingers. The perfect patsy." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning horror. Michael, realizing what he'd done, dropped the phone as if it had burned him. I didn't mean to," Cassandra returned, carrying the cake, her face falling as she registered the atmosphere in the room. "What's wrong? Why is everyone so quiet?" No one spoke. The candles on the cake flickered, wax beginning to drip onto the white frosting. Jennifer set down the stack of plates she was carrying with a clatter. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Cassandra, what have you done?" Cassandra's face drained of color as she spotted her phone on the table, the audio message notification still visible on the screen. I can explain. It's not what it sounds like. It sounds like you stole Abby's treatment money and let Mom take the blame," Todd said, his voice flat with disbelief. Cassandra's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally and finding none. Finally, they settled on me. "Aunt Eleanor," she began, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd used as a teenager when caught sneaking out. "Tell them it's not true. Tell them—" The silence around the table was deafening. It was the greatest public humiliation of my life, and simultaneously the chance that fate had delivered to me. But once again I hesitated. I looked at that face, so like Martha's it sometimes took my breath away, and couldn't bring myself to twist the knife. I saw the scared little girl who had clung to me at her mother's funeral, who had slept in my bed for months afterward because the nightmares wouldn't stop. I preferred to swallow the poison myself. "I think," I said slowly, every eye on me, "that this is Abby's birthday party. Whatever misunderstandings exist between adults should be discussed privately. Later." Abby looked between us all, confusion, and the beginning of tears in her eyes. "Is something wrong? Can I still have cake?" The tension broke slightly as several adults forced laughs. "Of course you can, sweetheart," Jennifer said, her voice strained but gentle. "Nothing's wrong. Let's sing happy birthday." As off-key voices filled the room, I caught Todd watching me with an unreadable expression. Did he know more than he'd let on? Had he suspected Cassandra all along? And what about those receipts he'd mentioned on the phone? What did he know about them? Cassandra slipped away during the gift opening, mumbling something about a work emergency. No one tried to stop her. The party limped along for another hour before the guests made their excuses and departed, leaving just Jennifer, Todd, Abby, and me. "Mom," Jennifer said as I was preparing to leave, her voice quiet while Abby played with her new toys in the living room. "We need to talk about what happened, about what we heard." I nodded, suddenly bone-tired. "Yes, but not today. Let Abby have her birthday." Todd surprised me by touching my arm, the first voluntary contact he'd initiated in months. "Eleanor, if what we heard is true, I'm sorry for how we've treated you." The words should have been balm to my wounded heart. Instead, they felt like salt. Too little, too late, offered only when evidence had made disbelief impossible. I smiled thinly. "I'll call you tomorrow, Jenny. We'll sort it all out then." But as I walked back to my tiny apartment, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, I wondered if anything could ever truly be sorted out again. While my family was judging me, something unexpected was happening outside our closed circle. My weighted blankets had begun circulating among clinics, and one April morning, as I was sorting through fabric scraps in my apartment, a knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Jennifer had been calling daily since Abby's birthday party, but we'd spoken only briefly. Her questions about Cassandra met with my evasions. I couldn't bring myself to be the one who destroyed Martha's daughter, even now. The man at my door was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an owlish appearance. He wore a charcoal suit that spoke of quality without ostentation, and carried a leather messenger bag slung across his body. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel Corbin, business reporter for the Duluth News-Tribune. I was hoping I might have a few minutes of your time." I hesitated, my hand on the doorframe. Reporters had been vultures during my bankruptcy, picking apart the carcass of my dignity for their headlines. "Local business owner accused of stealing from granddaughter's medical fund," and "Wilson's Fabrics closes amid embezzlement allegations." "I have nothing to say about the bankruptcy," I said, starting to close the door. "Actually," he replied, placing a hand gently on the door, "I'm here about your blankets." I blinked, confused. "My blankets?" "The weighted blankets you've been making for children's clinics across northern Minnesota. I've been hearing about them for weeks now. It's quite a story. Innovative design, therapeutic benefits, affordable price point. I'd love to do a feature." I shook my head, bewildered. "They're just blankets. Nothing special." Daniel smiled. "That's not what the parents of these children say, or the therapists, or the doctors. May I come in? Just for a few minutes?" Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider. My apartment was painfully small for entertaining, a studio with my bed in one corner, the kitchenette in another, and my sewing area dominating the rest of the space. Fabric was everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled in baskets draped over my single armchair. "Please excuse the mess," I said automatically, clearing some fabric swatches from the chair. I wasn't expecting company. Daniel took in the room with journalist's eyes, missing nothing. "This is where you make them all? Impressive." He sat in the cleared chair while I perched on the edge of my bed. The springs creaked beneath me, a sound I'd grown accustomed to during sleepless nights. "Mrs. Wilson, Eleanor, please." "Eleanor," he corrected with a smile. "I've spoken with Sarah Goldstein at the Children's Clinic. She tells me your blankets have been revolutionary for their patients with sensory processing disorders, anxiety, and ADHD. She says you've made over 50 blankets in the past 3 months, all donated." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I have time on my hands, and fabric scraps. "But the design innovations are yours, correct? The channeling system that keeps the weight distributed evenly? The removable, washable covers? The various weights calibrated for different ages and needs?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, but those are just practical solutions to problems I observed. Nothing special." Daniel leaned forward, his expression intent. "Mrs. Wilson, Eleanor, that's exactly what makes them special. You saw problems that commercial manufacturers either ignored or addressed with expensive solutions, and you found a way to solve them affordably." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a digital recorder. "Would you mind if I recorded our conversation? I want to make sure I get your story right." "There's no story," I protested. "I'm just an old woman sewing blankets." But Daniel was persistent, and something in his genuine interest wore down my resistance. I found myself talking about the weighted blankets, about the trial and error of finding the right fillings, about the mathematics of weight distribution, about the feedback from therapists and parents. What I didn't talk about was why I'd started making them, or the family scandal, or the receipt still hidden under my bed. And to his credit, Daniel didn't ask. His interest seemed purely focused on what I was creating, not what I'd lost. After an hour, he thanked me for my time and left, promising to send me a copy of the article before it went to print. I expected nothing to come of it, perhaps a small piece in the local business section that no one would read. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. My old flip phone that I kept for emergencies, the number known only to family and a few close friends. It was Sarah from the clinic, her voice breathless with excitement. "Eleanor, have you seen it, the Forbes article?" "What Forbes article?" I asked, confused. Daniel had mentioned the Duluth News Tribune, not Forbes. "The greatest comeback story in business," Sarah read aloud. "How a bankruptcy led to a revolution in therapeutic textiles. Eleanor, they're calling you an innovator, a disruptor. They're comparing you to entrepreneurs half your age." I sat down heavily on my bed, the springs protesting. There must be some mistake. I haven't spoken to anyone from Forbes. The reporter mentions interviewing you, Daniel Corbin. He says he's been following your story since he witnessed your confrontation outside the bankruptcy court. Eleanor, did you know he's a stringer for Forbes as well as the local paper? The memory surfaced suddenly. The man on the bench the day Jennifer had told me I'd ruined our family name. He'd been taking notes. That had been Daniel Corbin. "This can't be happening," I murmured. But it was. By evening, my phone was ringing constantly. Local TV stations, more newspapers, even a producer from a morning show in Minneapolis. I unplugged it, overwhelmed by the attention. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, a young woman with a camera and a man with a microphone stood in the hallway. Behind them, I could see more people crowding the stairwell. "Mrs. Wilson, can we get a statement about your innovative approach to therapeutic textiles? Is it true you're shipping blankets to hospitals in 5 states now? Are you planning to start a new company?" I closed the door, my heart racing. This wasn't what I had wanted. I'd sought only to keep my hands busy, to do something useful with my days. Not this. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. People began showing up at my apartment. Parents of children with special needs, occupational therapists, even a few business investors. They came with stories, with gratitude, with offers of partnership. And through it all, as my weighted blankets were being celebrated as innovative and revolutionary, in my own family I was still the thief of the ruined family name. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. One afternoon, as I was struggling to carry bolts of donated fabric up to my apartment, I ran into Mrs. Kozlowski on the stairs. "So," she said, her accent thickening with emotion, "you are famous now. Big business lady again. But still you carry your own fabric up these bad stairs." I shifted the weight in my arms. "I'm not famous, Mrs. Kozlowski, and certainly not a big business lady. Just busy." She studied me with sharp eyes. "When I came to this country, I had nothing. My husband, God rest him, he worked 3 jobs. People called him dirty Polish, said he stole work from real Americans." She reached out, patting my arm. "But we knew truth. Inside, we knew. That is what matters, Eleanor Wilson. Not what they say about you. What you know. Inside." I blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Kozlowski." She nodded once, sharply. "Now, famous or not famous, you cannot carry all this alone. Give me half." As we carried the fabric up to my apartment together, I realized that while my family still judged me, the world outside had somehow seen value in what I was creating. It was a strange, disorienting feeling, to be simultaneously vilified and celebrated. One night in late May, when the lilacs were blooming across Duluth and their scent drifted through my open window, there was a soft knock at my door. The clock on my microwave read 9:47 p.m., far too late for business visitors who had finally begun to taper off after the Forbes article frenzy. I set aside the special order I was working on, a weighted blanket for an adult with severe anxiety, a new direction for my creations, and made my way to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing in the dimly lit hallway, holding Abby's hand. My granddaughter was in her unicorn pajamas, her strawberry blonde hair braided for sleep, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. I opened the door, my heart catching in my throat. "Jenny?" Is everything all right? My daughter's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She clutched Abby's hand so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking on that single syllable. "I need to talk to you." I stepped back, ushering them inside. My tiny apartment suddenly felt even smaller with 3 people in it. Abby immediately climbed onto my bed, her small body sinking into the worn mattress. Within moments, her eyes were closed, the exhaustion of the late hour claiming her. Jennifer remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, though the May evening was mild. "Mom," she repeated, and then stopped, as if the words she needed were stuck somewhere between her heart and her mouth. "What is it, Jenny?" I asked, moving toward her, instinctively reaching out as I had when she was a child waking from a nightmare. "I know it wasn't you," she finally said, her voice a whisper. "I know you didn't take Abby's money." My heart stopped, then started again with a painful lurch. "How?" "I heard the entire audio recording," she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Not just the snippet that played at the party. Cassandra. She left her phone behind when she ran out. I took it. I listened to everything." She looked up at me then, her eyes swimming with tears. "She admitted it all, Mom. How she set you up. How she transferred the money to offshore accounts. How she planted evidence to make it look like you had financial problems with the store, problems that never existed. She even..." Jennifer's voice broke. "She even bragged about it. Said you were the perfect target because everyone knew how much you loved Abby. So no one would believe you'd steal from her." My legs suddenly wouldn't hold me. I sank onto the single chair, my hands trembling in my lap. After all these months of carrying the secret, of protecting Cassandra at the cost of my own reputation, to hear Jennifer say she knew the truth was both vindicating and terrifying. "Why didn't you tell us?" Jennifer asked, her voice small. "All this time you let us believe. You let me believe." "She's Martha's daughter," I said simply, the words scraping my throat like broken glass. "The only piece of my sister I have left." Jennifer made a sound, half sob, half bitter laugh. "So you sacrificed yourself, your business, your home, your relationship with your own family, all to protect her?" I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. "Oh, Mom." Jennifer knelt in front of me, taking my hands in hers. They were cold, like she'd been outside for hours. "I've been so awful to you. The things I said, that day at the courthouse." The memory washed over me. The snow falling, her face contorted with rage and disappointment, the words that had cut deeper than any knife. "You've ruined our family name. You believed what the evidence showed," I said quietly. "Anyone would have." "Not anyone," she corrected, her grip on my hands tightening. "Not a good daughter. Not someone who really knew you. I should have known you would never, could never, do something like that. Especially not to Abby." On the bed, my granddaughter stirred slightly in her sleep, her small face peaceful. She'd been through so much in her short life. The diagnosis, the endless therapies, the whispered conversations of adults who thought she couldn't hear or understand. "Why now?" I asked, turning back to Jennifer. "Why come tonight?" She swallowed hard. "Because I finally got the courage to confront Cassandra. I went to her apartment this afternoon. I played the recording for her, told her I knew everything." My blood ran cold. "What did she say?" "She denied it at first, then tried to justify it. Said she needed the money for gambling debts, that she'd planned to pay it back before anyone noticed. Then she..." Jennifer's voice hardened. "She threatened me. Said if I told anyone, she'd make things worse for you somehow. That she had insurance." My mind flashed to the receipts hidden under my bed, the ones Todd had mentioned on the phone. Was that the insurance Cassandra meant? "Jenny," I said slowly, "there's something you should know. I found receipts, bank transfers from the fundraiser account to one in Cassandra's name. They were hidden in the attic here when I moved in." Jennifer's eyes widened. "What? How?" "I don't know. Maybe she lived here before, though Mrs. Kozlowski says the previous tenant was an elderly man. Or maybe..." I hesitated, the implications settling over me like a cold shadow. "Maybe someone else knew and planted them for me to find." "Todd," Jennifer whispered, her face paling further. "He's been acting strange for months. Secretive, taking phone calls in the garage. I thought..." She looked away. "I thought he might be having an affair. But what if he knew about Cassandra? What if he was somehow involved?" The question hung in the air between us, too terrible to fully contemplate. If Todd had been complicit in Cassandra's theft, what did that mean for Jennifer? For Abby? "I don't know what to do, Mom," Jennifer admitted, her voice breaking. "If I go to the police with what I know, it could destroy everything. But how can I let Cassandra get away with what she did to you? To all of us?" My hands trembled as I reached out to stroke her hair, as I had when she was small. "The truth has a way of demanding to be heard, Jenny. One way or another." "Denunciate her, Mom," Jennifer pleaded, her eyes meeting mine. "End this." But how could I accuse my dead sister's daughter? How could I bear to be the one responsible for destroying that life? The dilemma tore at me, ripping open wounds that had barely begun to heal. Justice or mercy? Truth or silence? The choice stretched before me like a chasm, with no clear path across. On my bed, Abby murmured in her sleep, a small reminder of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about my reputation or Cassandra's crimes. It was about what kind of world we were creating for the next generation. A world where truth mattered, where actions had consequences, where love didn't mean enabling the worst in those we cared for. "I need time," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Time to think about what's right." Jennifer nodded, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Can we stay here tonight? I don't want to go home. Not until I understand what Todd knows." I looked around my tiny studio with its single bed and no couch. "Of course, you and Abby take the bed. I'll manage in the chair." As I tucked a blanket around my daughter and granddaughter, the weighted one that had started this unexpected chapter of my life, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time in months, someone believed in my innocence. It was a small flame of hope in the darkness, but perhaps enough to light the way forward. I decided to act in a different way. After a sleepless night in my chair, watching Jennifer and Abby breathe peacefully in my bed, I knew what I had to do. Not what the world would expect, not what might be considered justice in the traditional sense, but what felt right to my heart and soul. The sun was just beginning to cast long, golden fingers across Lake Superior when I slipped out of the apartment. I left a note for Jennifer. "Gone to the fabric store. Back by noon. Coffee in the pot." The normalcy of the words belied the weight of my decision. Marshall's Fabrics opened at 7 a.m. Old Mr. Marshall, a contemporary of mine who had supplied my store for decades, raised his bushy eyebrows when I walked in. Since the Forbes article, he'd been giving me a professional discount on materials, a kindness I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "Eleanor," he greeted me, leaning on the counter. His arthritic hands, not unlike my own, splayed across the smooth wood. "You're here early. What can I get for you today?" "Red velvet," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The deepest, richest red you have. Enough for a twin-size blanket." He studied me for a moment, perhaps noting the determination in my eyes, the set of my jaw. "Special order?" "You could say that." He led me to the back of the store, where bolts of fabric lined the walls like soldiers standing at attention. His fingers skimmed across velvets until they stopped at one the color of fresh blood. "This one came in from New York last week," he said. "Highest quality. Normally $22 a yard, but for you, I'll pay full price." I interrupted. "This one needs to be without compromise." He nodded, not questioning further, and measured out the fabric with practiced precision. I also selected batting, thread, and special weighted beads that had become easier to source now that suppliers were seeking me out rather than the other way around. Back at my apartment, Jennifer and Abby were still asleep, the weight of emotional exhaustion keeping them under. I set my purchases on my work table and began. The rhythmic movement of cutting, pinning, and sewing calmed my racing thoughts. Each stitch was a decision, a commitment, a step forward on the path I'd chosen. By the time they woke, I was halfway done. Jennifer watched me work while Abby ate the cereal I'd set out. "What are you making, Mom?" Jennifer asked, cradling a mug of coffee between her palms as if seeking warmth despite the June morning heat. "A last blanket," I replied, not looking up from my work. "A special one." She didn't press further, perhaps sensing the gravity in my words. After breakfast, Jennifer took Abby to the park across the street, giving me space to finish my work. The blanket took shape under my hands. A deep, rich red, the color of the coat I'd worn the day of my bankruptcy hearing. The day everything had changed. I worked through lunch, my fingers flying across the fabric with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. By mid-afternoon, it was done. A perfect weighted blanket, 7 pounds, with channels that kept the weight evenly distributed, and a removable cover that could be washed. But unlike my other creations, this one held no whimsical patterns, no embroidered names or cheerful designs. This was a blanket of reckoning. When Jennifer and Abby returned, sunburned and smiling from their day at the park, I was waiting. The blanket was folded neatly on the table beside the folder of bank receipts I'd retrieved from under my bed. "I need you to watch Abby for an hour," I told Jennifer. "There's something I have to do." She looked at the blanket, then at the folder, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Mom, are you sure? We could go to the police together, show them the evidence." "This isn't about the police," I said quietly. "This is about family, about choices." I wrapped the blanket and folder together with simple brown paper and string, the way I used to package special orders at my store. The weight of it in my arms felt right, substantial, consequential. Cassandra lived in a modern apartment complex on the east side of Duluth, with a view of the lake that my teacher's salary-turned-small business owner budget had never afforded me. The doorman recognized me from the news coverage and let me up without calling ahead, a small mercy, as it prevented Cassandra from refusing to see me. She opened the door on the third knock, her face falling when she saw me. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater that I recognized as Martha's, another piece of my sister she'd claimed as her own. "Aunt Eleanor," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected. May I come in?" I asked, not waiting for an answer before stepping past her into the sleek, minimalist apartment. Everything was white and chrome and glass, cold and impersonal, so unlike the warm, cluttered home Martha had created. Cassandra closed the door, her posture defensive. "If Jennifer sent you—" "No one sent me," I interrupted, setting the package on her glass coffee table. "I came because I needed to." She eyed the package warily. "What's that?" "Open it." With reluctant fingers, she untied the string and unwrapped the paper. The red velvet blanket spilled out like a pool of blood, and on top of it the folder of receipts, damning evidence of her theft and betrayal. Her face drained of color. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "They found me," I replied simply, just as the truth always finds a way to be heard. I watched as she flipped through the receipts, her hands shaking, her breathing becoming shallow. Are you going to the police?" I studied her face, the face so like my sister's that it sometimes hurt to look at her. The face of the little girl who had once followed me around my fabric store, collecting scraps in a paper bag for her doll clothes. The face of the teenager who had sobbed in my arms at her mother's funeral. "I sewed you a final blanket," I said, gesturing to the red velvet. "It's the same color as the coat I wore the day of my bankruptcy, the day my daughter told me I'd ruined our family name." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears, whether of remorse or fear I couldn't tell. "Life doesn't sew itself together," I continued, my voice steady. "Each stitch is a choice. Now it's your turn to decide." She stared at me, uncomprehending. "You can continue living this lie," I explained, "taking what isn't yours, betraying the people who love you. Or you can make different choices, better ones, the kind your mother would have wanted for you." I stood to leave, my purpose fulfilled. At the door, I turned back to her, still frozen beside the red blanket and incriminating papers. The blanket is weighted, 7 pounds, the symbolic weight of truth. It will either comfort you or crush you. The choice is yours. Weeks later, she made her decision. At a family gathering, one I'd been invited to properly this time, Cassandra stood up before dinner was served. Her hands trembled as she held a glass of water, her face pale but resolute. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice cutting through the casual conversation. "Something I should have said months ago." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Jennifer and Todd, their expressions guarded. Abby, innocent and curious. Various cousins, aunts, and uncles who had believed the worst of me. "Aunt Eleanor didn't take the money from Abby's fundraiser," Cassandra said, her voice breaking. "I did. I set her up to take the blame. I stole from my own family, from a child who needed help, and I let an innocent woman lose everything rather than face the consequences of my actions." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces registered shock, others a dawning comprehension, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Cassandra continued, tears streaming down her face. "I can't undo what I've done, but I've liquidated my investments. I've returned what's left of the money to the clinics treating Abby, and I'm so sorry." She looked directly at me then, her eyes, Martha's eyes, pleading for something I wasn't sure I could give. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you all to know the truth. She left in silence, the door closing softly behind her. No one tried to stop her. My daughter came to me after, her arms wrapping around me in a hug that felt like coming home after a long, dark journey. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered against my hair. "It's over now," I said, returning her embrace. "That's what matters." And I realized that I had made my own choice as well. I had chosen not vengeance but opportunity. The opportunity for truth to emerge from Cassandra's own lips. For redemption to be her decision rather than my demand. I had given her the chance to stitch her own life back together. One painful, honest choice at a time. As my family gathered around me that evening, I understood that no name, family or otherwise, defines who we are. It's the choices we stitch together throughout our lives. The patterns we create with our actions, the warmth or coldness we bring to others. That was the legacy I chose to leave. Not a pristine family name, but the truth accompanied by tenderness. Life often asks us to make impossible choices between justice and mercy, between truth and compassion. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have exposed your dead sister's only daughter to save your own reputation? Would you have sacrificed everything, your business, your home, your family relationships, to protect someone who betrayed you so deeply? Or would you have found, as I did, that true redemption comes not from vengeance, but from giving others the opportunity to make their own amends? My story isn't just about blankets or business comebacks. It's about the weight we all carry, the secrets, the pain, the choices that define us. Sometimes the heaviest burdens are invisible to others, pressing down on us like my weighted blankets. But just as those blankets bring comfort to troubled souls, sometimes carrying that weight with dignity can lead to unexpected healing. Remember, it's not our family name that defines who we are, but the patterns we stitch together with our actions, one choice at a time. If my journey touched your heart today, please subscribe to hear more stories of family, forgiveness, and finding strength in the most unexpected places. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Thank you for walking this path with me. From bankruptcy to redemption, from shame to purpose, from silence to truth.